Hello, everybody, and a very happy new year to all of you. It's the 2nd of January, so I hope you had a good start and a good New Year's. And welcome back to the second shelf and the first video of 2019, which will be a look back on 2018, as is customary on BookTube. It starts right after Christmas. People do their best of lists, the top 10 reads or something like that. And I, of course, want to talk to you about my tops and flops of 2018 as well. The way I will do it is I will concentrate on the books that I've read that were actually published in 2018. I read a lot of backlist books. I also read classics, and some of them were exceptionally good, but I'm not talking about those. And I'm not going to make a top 10 or anything like that. It's 3 books in the tops and 3 books in the flops. And all of those, the 6 books, they stood out for me for some reason, either positively or negatively. So without further ado, just let's get started. And let's get started with the tops. The first book is the book that made me think the most. It would be certainly in my top 10 books or top 5 books if I did one of those lists. But I picked a book that I read and reread immediately, which is always a sign that it really had me think. And this book is Joyce Carol Oates' novel of 2018, Hazards of Time Travel, which was published in November. I read this as a buddy read with Eric from The Lonesome Reader. And after we finished our buddy read, I reread the book immediately. It's a dystopian novel. It opens in the future in the US, 21st century, so the near future, and the main protagonist is a young woman, Adriana Stoll. She is just, 17, 18, and she lives in this world where everything is controlled. And she is quite a headstrong woman, and she is supposed to be a valedictorian and give a speech ending high school, and this speech is sort of politically controversial. She's arrested, and the punishment is that she is exiled, quote unquote. Transported back into the past, into the year 1959, where she is given a new identity, and she has to enroll in a university in Wayne, Scotia, in Wisconsin. She studies psychology, and she has a 4-year exile punishment. And the main portion of the book then takes place in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And it's about Adriana trying to cope with her new life. And she falls in love there. She makes friends, but she feels alienated. And I really thought the story of the book, how Joyce Carol Oates makes us think about memory, makes us think about how we construct the past or reconstruct the past. There's a lot of politics in the book, but also a lot about the development of science in the early 1960s. And it's all wrapped in a really engaging story. So this book will stay for me. Will stay with me. I'm sure it will. It really made me think, and that's why I picked it as one of the books in the top. I also read quite some nonfiction this year, not as much as I would have liked. I think about a third of my books was nonfiction, so I want to improve that next year, but that's the story for another video. And quite some good nonfiction, also older books, but the book that I picked is one that I read in the beginning of the year, and that was really, really entertaining, and that I would love to revisit because it was so vibrant and lively, and that is Tina Brown's Vanity Fair Diaries. Tina Brown is originally an English journalist, and she moved to New York in the beginning of the 1980s to become the new editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, which at that time was a sort of a struggling magazine, and she made it glossy and glamorous, and she was very successful, and she She kept a diary during those 8 years that she was editor-in-chief, and the book is a little bit, the time period is a little bit longer. It starts in 1983 and ends in 1992. So just before she becomes editor-in-chief, and then she recounts the struggles with her bosses, but also with other editors, and what stories to pick, and the writers she has with them. There are a lot of parties. It's not, an in-depth analysis of the magazine world, but it's intelligently written, and it's extremely entertaining. And for my part, I really learned a lot about this world of magazine making. So if you're at all interested in that, I can certainly recommend it. And for me, it was, like I said, one of the most entertaining nonfiction books that I read in 2018. And if you're following my channel, or if you have been following my channel for any length of time, you know that in 2018 I also tried to read debuts, at least one, or possibly, if possible, two each month. So I also looked at the debuts I read, and the one that stood out for me was Peng Shepherd's debut novel, The Book of M, which was published in June. It's a dystopian novel, and the main characters are Ori and his wife Max. The premise of the book is that starting in India, there is a disease, you can call it. People lose their shadows, and the people who lose their shadows also will slowly, gradually lose all their memories. Not in a day, but over the course of a certain period of time that can vary. So Max and Ori, they sort of escaped into the countryside, and at one day, Max lost her shadows, and that means she will lose her memory. She will lose her memory of her husband, and of her life, and of herself. She escapes because she doesn't want to inflict this on her husband. And the book then follows Max's journey while losing her memory, but also Ori's journey looking for his wife. There are other main characters that will be introduced, and it will all converge in the end. And I thought the premise was really interesting and novel, but it for a debut, I thought the characters were extremely well developed. The storyline was really interesting. It was engaging. The writing was good. So I love this book as a debut, and I'm sure that I will look out for whatever Peng Shepherd writes next. I can recommend it if you're interested in that kind of story, even if you're not that much into sci-fi, because it's much more a dystopian novel than it is pure hardcore sci-fi. And the themes explored, especially about memory and how to keep memory or regain memory, is really, really interesting. So I can highly recommend this one. But, of course, 2018 wasn't all tops. It wasn't even all the rest of mediocre books, but there were some really bad books I read. And no, I'm not going to talk about the Manbooker Longlist. If you watch my videos regularly, you know how frustrated I was with many of the books on the long list, and I made reviews of most of them. You can watch that if you want, but I'm not going to talk about the Manbooker 2018 ever again, or any of the books. But I had other books that really annoyed me. And one that I picked, and the novel that I picked was for my flops. The first one of my flops was Tsitsi Dangaremga, This Mournable Body, which was published in August of this year. It's the third one in a trilogy following the same protagonist, a young woman, Tambu. It's set in post-Rhodesian Zimbabwe, and in This Mournable Body, Tambu is in her early 30s, we don't know exactly, and she is struggling. This sounds interesting, and it could have been, but the writing was just not good, and the story wasn't good either. There is no real development of the character. There is just this woman meeting people. There you have this whole tsunami of characters that are introduced and then discarded. There's really nothing of any interest happening in the book. At least it was for me. I'm sorry to say that. I'm sure if you read the book and you loved it, good for you, but I just thought it was, on all accounts, just a bad book. And the second book I picked for my flops was a book that, in my opinion, was just overhyped. It was also a debut, and I'm talking about Lisa Halliday's book, Asymmetry, which was published in February. Lisa Halliday is an American writer who lives in Milan, I believe, and Asymmetry is a book of two stories and a coda. Already that word irked me somehow, but anyway. And the first story is about Alice, a young writer who falls in love with a much older, or she's an editor, I'm sorry, and she falls in love with a much older, very famous writer. The second story is about Ammar, an American Iraqi who is stuck in London airport. He is picked out of the line and then interrogated. And then the coda, the third one, sort of quite intelligently, I have to say, connects these two stories. But it was just boring to me. This book was praised everywhere. Whether you watch the Guardian podcast, whether you listen to the Guardian podcast or the New York Times or whatever, people were just over the moon about this book, and I didn't understand it. Probably I'm just too stupid. I don't know, but for me, I don't know. It was a hype book that just didn't deliver. I didn't like the writing. I thought the writing was boring and overly intellectual, overly intelligent, overly I know it all, which I never really like. And the stories, it just didn't do it for me. I'm sorry. Overhyped, but not for me. Then we come to the end of the flops. I also looked at the nonfiction, but other books, and then I thought which book, and again, not talking about the Manbooker Longlist books, which book really annoyed me the most, which book irked me, and still irks me when I think of it. And this book is, without a doubt, Sick by Porochista Kakpur, which was published in June of this year. It's a memoir, and if you're following me on either here, YouTube, or the other social media, I really love memoirs. But this one, no. Nobody, no. Porochista Kakpur tells us about her illness. She has been sick, as she claims, for most of her life, but people, doctors whom she consulted, could never really find out what's wrong with her. I doubt, I don't know. I don't know whether she's really sick. That's not the point. But what really irked me about the book is the self-indulgent way she talks about herself. She is a very privileged woman from quite a rich background. And in the beginning of the book, when she and her family immigrate to the US, and her first apartment, and she complains about the fact that this house only has one bathroom. I should have stopped reading right then and there, but it goes on in this overly self-indulgent way, not realizing at all how privileged she is, putting blame on everybody, whether it's doctors or her friends or other relations. And I mean, a memoir always has a certain degree of self-indulgence. Duh, it's a memoir. You're talking about yourself. But in this book, I thought it was just over the top. And I I hate read it in the end because I finished the book. I didn't DNF it, but it was just not for me. I know that there are people out there who really thought this was a good book, and I don't want to step on your toes if you thought that, but I just couldn't handle the way that the author looked at herself in this, in my view, really overly self-indulgent way. So I picked this one as the book that annoyed me the most in 2018. And this was it for my tops and flops of 2018. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed them, the tops and the flops. Talk to me down in the comments if you want to share any of the books that you really loved in 2018 or that really annoyed you in 2018. I'm always curious, as you know, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.